What if one phone call, just one, could change the course of international history? What if a conversation that was never supposed to happen, never meant to be recorded, had just been leaked? A call between two of the world's most controversial leaders, spoken in absolute secrecy, and now threatening to ignite something far bigger than politics. This is not speculation. This is not a theory. This is real, and it's unfolding faster than anyone expected. It all started in Florida, inside a private suite at Mar-a-Lago. No press, no aides, no scheduled briefing. Just Donald Trump, alone, dialing a private, secure number. On the other end, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The call bypassed every official channel. No interpreters, no transcripts, just two men with history, ambition, and a reason to keep things quiet. But what they didn't know, what neither of them could have predicted, was that a rogue AI system embedded inside the US surveillance grid flagged their call. It wasn't supposed to. It was built to detect foreign terrorist threats, not world leaders talking off the books. But the system heard something. 3 words, in fact: Operation Rakshak Green. That phrase doesn't exist in any American file. It's not in any NATO database, but in Indian military code, it's a trigger, a wartime directive that can only be activated under the threat of imminent conflict. So the question is, why was Donald Trump using it? How did he even know what it meant? Within minutes of that call ending, Pakistan's military command issued an urgent threat warning. Not to the public, not to the media, but internally, to its highest-ranking generals. Something had spooked them, something serious. Meanwhile, an Indian intelligence official, retired but well-connected, vanished from his home in Delhi. No forced entry, no trace, just gone. And halfway across the world, in Washington, D.C., a classified memo circulated between U.S. and British intelligence. A memo titled, "Unauthorized Diplomatic Interference, Tier 1 Escalation Risk." This isn't politics as usual. This isn't posturing. This is something else. Something far more dangerous. Because behind this one leaked call is a network of secrets, alliances, and betrayals that could shift the global balance of power. You haven't heard about it on the news. You won't find it on official record. But what happened during that phone call is already having ripple effects in every major intelligence agency on the planet. So now ask yourself, was it a mistake? Or was it the first step in a plan none of us were supposed to know about? Because what comes next might change everything. It started with a ping, not from a phone or an app, but from a satellite array buried deep beneath a classified NSA compound in Utah. The system flagged a data anomaly, a compressed audio packet, heavily encrypted, matching none of the usual diplomatic encryption keys. It was traced not to a government server, but to a compromised relay node once used by Israeli cyber intelligence. Inside that packet, the call, Trump, Modi, Operation Rakshak Green. The full recording, undistorted, complete with voice markers, timestamps, and location metadata. No one could believe it was real until the wave hit. By the time the leak reached the first level, analysts, it was already too late. A junior operative tried to contain the data, but the AI that found it had already duplicated and distributed fragments to shadow servers across Europe and Asia. One of those fragments reached a man named Zayan. Rehman, former ISI operative, now a rogue agent for hire. Zayan had been off the grid for 5 years. Now he had something he could sell, or weaponize. Back in DC, Alex Varro's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. He wasn't supposed to be involved anymore, not since he walked away from a Black Ops analyst role after exposing an unauthorized drone kill chain in Yemen. But this was different. His name was hard-coded into the packet's distribution tree. Someone had hardwired him in, deliberately. The voice on the call was unmistakable. Trump, without hesitation, discussing potential troop movements in Kashmir, and something else. A phrase Modi whispered near the end of the call, barely audible. "Green is go." Alex froze. That phrase meant one thing. In the old Indo-Pacific war games they'd trained for, green is go meant escalation. And if Trump knew that, if He was inviting it. Then the entire South Asian region was already sitting on a powder keg. He needed help. The first call he made was to Lena Armitage, an MI6 field operative stationed out of Berlin. She didn't pick up. The second call was to Commander Rafiq Khan, a former Pakistani military strategist turned whistleblower. Khan had information, sensitive data about cross-border infiltration operations on the line of control. But when Alex's call connected, all he heard was static, and a single recorded phrase in Urdu. "Too late, American." The fear crept in slowly. This wasn't just about a call. This was about who had orchestrated it and why Trump had reached out in secret. Alex pulled out an old burner drive, a dead drop device he'd sworn never to reconnect. But this situation called for it. Inside, buried beneath layers of outdated encryption, was the last message his contact ever sent before going dark. If Modi activates green, Pakistan will retaliate within 72 hours. Civilian or not, Trump is now part of the chain. The chain, a term only used among covert strike planners, indicating that the speaker, regardless of official title or power, was an authorized node in a retaliation loop. In other words, Trump had signed himself into an unofficial war plan. But how? And more importantly, why? The questions swirled like a storm in Alex's head. He didn't trust Easy, not after what happened in Ankara. But there was one person who might know how this chain was built. Maya Joe, a former CIA cryptanalyst turned whistleblower, now living off the grid in Taipei. The last time he saw her, she swore never to work with any government again. Now she might be his only way in, and just when he was about to send the message to her secure channel, his laptop screen went black. Then, a line of red text scrolled slowly across the dark display. "You weren't supposed to hear that." He slammed the lid shut. His location was already compromised. Outside, a car screeched to a stop across the street. Tinted windows, no plates. His heart pounded in his chest. The call was real. The war protocol had been mentioned. And now, the people behind it knew he knew. There was no more time to think. No more time to wait. The leak wasn't just a breach. It was a catalyst. Someone somewhere wanted this war, and they were willing to kill anyone who got in the way. The city felt colder than it should have. Even under the sharp mid-morning sun, Alex's skin prickled, as if every shadow held a threat. He changed hotels 3 times in 12 hours, each time using different aliases pulled from dead Foreign Service IDs. By the time he reached the safe house, an old supply shop wired with spectrum jammers and noise generators, his hands were shaking. Not from fear, from clarity. Something was wrong with the call, not just what was said, but what wasn't. He played the audio again, alone, in a soundproof room deep underground. It was subtle, buried beneath the main voices, but it was there. A third voice, not Trump, not Modi, just a low, whispered phrase, looped twice, almost like a prompt. Confirm green, the leak wasn't raw. It was edited. Someone had inserted the phrase. That changed everything. If the call had been altered, then the entire reaction from Pakistan, the military alert, the intelligence memos, they were all based on manipulated data. A setup, and that begged the most dangerous question yet. Who planted it, and who benefited from it? Maya finally replied, 3 hours after Alex sent the encrypted ping. Her message was short, a single file, compressed, no text. He opened it in isolation. The contents made his jaw tighten. It was a map, specifically, a live routing protocol used by a deep cover network known only by its codename, Wrath. 5 dots blinked across the Middle East and South Asia, 2 in India, 1 in Islamabad, 1 in Dubai, and 1 inside Langley. There was a mole in the CIA. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't theory. It was strategy. Someone had seeded false intelligence into the US system to spark a regional war. Trump's voice was real, but the invocation of Operation Rakshak Green had been inserted, modified to sound like truth. And if someone had access to executive-level voice replication tech, they weren't working alone. Alex knew what this was now. Not a leak. Not even a conspiracy. This was a test. A global stress test using India, Pakistan, and Trump as live variables. The moment he saw the pattern, everything else clicked into place. 2 weeks ago, Modi had quietly canceled a summit with the Chinese foreign minister. No explanation given. At the same time, a defense satellite used by the Indian Army had gone dark for 47 minutes. On the other side of the border, Pakistan's National Defense University issued a full mobilization simulation citing external pressure scenarios. That wasn't coincidence. This was a manufactured escalation, a multi-front manipulation campaign designed to edge two nuclear powers into a collision course and use the chaos to test global response times. But why now? He reached out to Lena again, this time through a quantum relay embedded in a decommissioned NATO server. She answered breathless, whispering, "They tried to take me," she said. "I was in Prague. They intercepted my travel logs. Whoever's behind this, they're cleaning house." "Who's they?" Alex asked. A pause, then a name. Sierras. He hadn't heard that word in years. Sierras was never official. It wasn't on paper. It wasn't even part of the Five Eyes network. It was a private intel shadow firm, off the books, cross-border, and answerable to no government. Formed by ex-operatives from CIA, MI6, Mossad, and RAW. It was supposed to be dismantled after an international scandal in 2016, but clearly, someone kept the engine running, and now they were running it off the books. And off the rails. Sierras had the tech to forge the call, the reach to plant it in US systems, and the motive to push conflict in South Asia, because in chaos, private intelligence thrives. Governments buy fear, corporations buy data. And Sierras? Sierras sells the war before the first bullet is fired. Alex knew they wouldn't let him live much longer, but he had one last advantage. The original call. Buried deep in the sub-audio layers was a time distortion. A sign of compression, yes, but also a sign of tampering, which meant somewhere the unedited version still existed. And if he could find it, prove that the Operation Rakshak green code was inserted, he could dismantle the entire setup. The eye. Final clue came from the least likely source, a former hacker known only as Glint, who'd been off the radar since 2020. Glint sent Alex a phrase, Keynote Canary 1748. No explanation, no context, but Alex recognized the reference. Speech, given by Modi, 2 weeks before the call. At exactly 17 minutes and 48 seconds, Modi had paused, sipped water, and looked off camera. Just for a second. A cue, a signal, and in that signal, the unraveling began. The silence in the room was deafening. Alex sat alone, eyes fixed on the video frame frozen at timestamp 1748. Modi, standing at a podium in front of thousands, seemed to glance past the crowd, not at anyone, but at the lens. And in that single second, he tapped his finger twice on the side of the podium, a subtle gesture, innocuous to most. But to anyone trained in the old code of political subterfuge, it screamed one thing, a signal. The moment haunted Alex. Why? Would the Prime Minister of India publicly signal just days before a secret call with Trump? Unless the call wasn't rogue at all. Unless it had been planned by both sides. That changed the equation. This wasn't a foreign manipulation. It was an inside job. Suddenly, everything clicked. The leak, the altered audio, the silent, satellite outage. It wasn't just about manufacturing conflict. It was a smokescreen to bury something else, something far more dangerous. A program, a joint project, US and Indian-backed, hidden under layers of civilian infrastructure. A name buried in Glint's metadata finally made sense. Shakti Node. He dug deeper. Hours without food, without sleep. What he found made his blood run cold. Shakti Node wasn't a military initiative. It was a neural AI weaponization program, a hybrid platform combining biometric surveillance with predictive strike capability. The goal: preempt threats before they occurred using live population data. Predict riots, track insurgencies, eliminate targets before they moved. But the system wasn't ready. It failed every ethics test in the Pentagon. India had reportedly shelved it years ago. Apparently, that was a lie. The leak, the war scare, the cross-border tensions, it was all part of a larger diversion to distract from the quiet reactivation of Shakti Node. Modi and Trump hadn't just spoken as friends, they were partners in deployment. A test site had already gone live. And the first subjects? Civilians in Kashmir. Alex felt sick. The betrayal wasn't just geopolitical. It was personal. Because the original model for Shakti Node, the code that allowed AI to parse emotional intent through facial cues, was his. A line of neural mapping he'd written 6 years ago under a DARPA grant. He'd thought it had been archived and buried. But someone had resurrected it. Without permission. Without oversight. Someone had used his code to start a shadow war. He reached for the old drive again and searched for confirmation. And there it was, buried in the oldest logs, a user access tag that made his heart drop. Maya Jo. She hadn't just helped him crack the network. She'd been in on it from the beginning. The realization hit like a gut punch. She had been his friend, his ally, the one person he trusted in a world of deception. But now, it was clear. She hadn't gone off-grid to hide from governments. She was working with them, testing Shakti Node under the radar, using Alex's name to get past security gates and then cutting him out once the system was operational. It was her voice that whispered "confirm green" in the call. She had spliced the phrase into the audio. The war wasn't an accident, it was the trigger. The perfect environment to test a system designed to eliminate threats before they spoke. And now, Alex was the threat. Betrayed, cornered, and hunted. Alex stood in the middle of the safe house, surrounded by blinking servers and dead monitors. He was no longer chasing the truth. He was the truth. Proof that the governments of two of the world's largest democracies had bypassed law, ethics, and morality to build a weapon of prediction and control, and they were willing to burn the world just to see if it worked. He had one move left, not to run, not to hide, but to go public. The real war wasn't between India and Pakistan. It wasn't about borders or diplomacy or even Trump's ego. It was a war over reality itself, over who got to shape it, predict it, and control it. The game had changed. Now the only way out was through the fire. It all came down to one location, Geneva. The Human Rights Summit was just hours away. Delegates from over 50 nations were arriving under the illusion of peace and policy talks, unaware that beneath the conference center sat a hardened server core linked directly to Shakti Node's pilot system. A system that, if activated here, on neutral ground, would shift from simulation to live analysis, profiling every diplomat, every leader, every journalist in the building. In real time. Alex had one chance. He walked through the back entrance of the conference center, credentials forged by Glint, jacket lined with signal dampeners, and a fail-safe data shard embedded in the hem. In his hand was the only known unaltered copy of the Trump-Modi call, raw, untouched, the version before the green signal was added. With it came everything: metadata, voice print logs, AI fingerprint trails, the original framework for Shakti Node, and the access logs that tied it all back to one source. Maya Jo. She was already there, 2 levels below the main summit, standing. In front of a transparent interface, the Shakti core pulsing like a living thing behind her. She looked up as he entered. No alarm, no panic. Just calm, composed, almost relieved. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me," she said. Alex didn't speak at first. He stared at her like a stranger. Like the woman in front of him was some expertly constructed replica of the person he used to trust. And maybe she was. "You used my code to build a weapon," he said quietly. She tilted her head. "I used your code to stop chaos, to predict it, to control it before it spirals." You started chaos to justify it. Her eyes didn't flinch. Better a controlled fire than a global wildfire. He moved closer. You forged a war. You framed an entire nuclear conflict just to run your experiment. She stepped back toward the console. And it worked. Did you see how fast the world reacted? How close we came to the edge? Now imagine a world where we could stop it before it begins. This isn't peace, he growled. This is preemptive tyranny. Tension surged like a wave between them. His hand moved slowly to the shard embedded in his jacket. He could upload the raw audio, expose everything, crash the system before it went live. But doing so would trigger a countermeasure, Shakti's emergency lockdown protocol. Maya wasn't bluffing. If he did this, everyone in the building would lose access to every connected system. Total blackout, emergency lockdown, the summit would go into crisis mode. And that's when he realized that was her plan. Maya never wanted to unleash Shakti Node for the world. She wanted someone else to do it for her. Someone like Alex. If he uploaded the leak in the middle of the summit, the ensuing chaos would justify full deployment. The heads of state would beg for a system that could have stopped it all. They'd fund Shakti themselves. She had turned him into her final variable, the final push. He backed away. You want me to detonate this? You want panic, he whispered. Her voice was softer now. No, Alex. I want proof that the world is broken enough to demand what I've built. He stood frozen between two impossible choices. Let the system go live quietly or take the risk and expose it, knowing full well the resulting panic could give it permanent global sanction. His eyes locked on hers. The betrayal still burned, but beneath it was something colder. Determination. He reached into his jacket, and instead of the shard, pulled out a remote signal trigger, a silent beacon. 10 floors above, Lena Armitage intercepted the signal. She wasn't alone. She had brought 3 former operatives, all survivors of past Black Ops programs buried by Sierras and its founders. Together, they'd been waiting. They moved. Back underground, Maya's expression changed. She turned to the console to shut it down manually, but it was too late. A secondary program embedded by Glint and activated through Alex's beacon began transmitting the unaltered call to every open diplomatic line on the summit's secure network. Live, irrefutable, instant. One by one, terminals in the main hall lit up with the audio, Trump's voice, Modi's, and then silence. No. Confirm green, no code, no war order, just the truth. Maya stared at Alex like he'd just cracked, her open. The building didn't panic, it froze. For once, the truth hadn't started the fire, it had extinguished it. The summit ended not in fire or fury, but in silence. A silence so thick, it could choke the air. Delegates who had come expecting champagne and scripted speeches now stood, shoulder to shoulder in stunned stillness, listening to a transmission that none of them were meant to hear. The world hadn't exploded, not yet, but something had cracked, quietly, irreversibly. The illusion. As the final seconds of the leaked call echoed out across the chamber, Alex Varro stood in a service corridor watching the live feed from a hidden terminal. No sirens, no alarms, just faces, leaders, diplomats, journalists, all seeing for the first time how close they'd come to dancing over the edge of war. Not because of an attack, but because of a simulation, a manufactured reality, dressed in urgency, disguised as diplomacy. Maya was gone. In the chaos of the system lockout, she'd slipped away. No trace, no signal, no trail. Cirrus would cover her exit, of course. They always had exits. That's what made them dangerous. But she wasn't the same anymore. Something in her face had fractured when the unaltered audio played, like the truth had hit her harder than it hit the world. Maybe she believed in her own lie a little too much. Maybe she wanted to be stopped. Alex would never know. Outside, the story had already begun to spin. Media outlets scrambled to frame it, some calling it a hoax, others a failed AI experiment, others still blaming a rogue intelligence faction. No one really knew the truth. And that was the point. The real danger hadn't been war. It had been control. The shaping of reality through manipulated information. But now, thanks to Alex, the illusion had been disrupted. Not destroyed. Just disrupted. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt exhausted, hollow, like he'd survived a storm only to realize it had changed him from the inside out. He thought back to when this all started. Just a flagged call, a glitch in the system. But the glitch, it turned out, had a soul, a voice, a reason, and maybe so did he. Lena met him outside the Summit Center. She looked worn, her shoulder bandaged, hair pinned back hastily. But her eyes held something he hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Not the professional kind, the real kind. The kind that says, "You did what I couldn't." They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. By sunset, Alex was already on a plane out of Switzerland. No destination listed. Just a private flight booked under a shell name, somewhere safe, if anywhere could be called that anymore. But just before he boarded, his phone buzzed. A secure message. No name, just a line of text. "You stopped Shakti, but we've already built Shiva." His stomach turned. A different code name. A different program, one level deeper. Of course, the game never ends. He pocketed the phone and stepped onto the plane. Outside the window, the sky burned in hues of gold and blood orange, like the world was daring him to believe it was still beautiful. He knew better now. There are no full stops in stories like this, only pauses, temporary silences between louder storms. He closed his eyes and tried to rest. But sleep wouldn't come. Not anymore. Somewhere out there, Sierras was regrouping. Shakti was dead, but its ghost still lingered. And if they had already started building something worse, then the real war hadn't been stopped, just delayed. He wasn't sure what he was now. Not a spy, not a hero, not even a whistleblower. Just a man who pulled a thread and watched the world unravel. But he knew one thing. Next time, he wouldn't be chasing answers. He'd be ready before the first question was even asked, because once you've seen behind the curtain, once you've felt the cold machinery of the world's invisible architects, you don't wait for orders. You become the variable they can't control. And that is where the real fight begins.